Hi, folks. I'm Neil Barton. This is number 4 of the old podcast. Yes, Neil Barton does have a podcast, award-winning. Well, maybe one day it will be. Anyway, today's guest, this is going to be fascinating here, but he's one guy you don't want to walk the mean streets of East Texas and say, hey, man, you got any weed?
What you gonna get? What you gonna get? Some wonderful phenomenon of chemicals everywhere.
Hi, folks. Once again, Neil Barton here with the old podcast, having some great podcast water. Our guest today is the resident agent in charge of the DEA of East Texas. That will be Jeff Kennemar, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. You and I have had a chance to talk a lot on the phone.
We have.
You come by the television station to talk to us about what is going on.
Yes, sir.
But thank you very much for joining us for the
Thank
old
you.
podcast
Thank
here,
you.
letting folks know more about what you do and the dangers that are on the street. So first of all, the Drug Enforcement Administration, how long has that been around?
It's been around since the 70s. It started out as the Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And once the need arose and drugs started becoming so prevalent, we decided to become a premier or a distinct drug enforcement administration.
Whenever you hear the words DEA, some folks say, no, are they like police or whatever, but you guys are the feds, right?
That's correct.
Out of the federal government. And of course, when you talk about the DEA, a lot of folks think about the shows Breaking Bad, and also if you look on Netflix, we're talking about Narcos here.
Right.
So how real is your experience on Netflix? Is that a lot of Hollywood, or is that true?
On a case-by-case basis, I'm the biggest pessimist there is because I'm very critical, as most of us are, about how
Hollywood.
they portray us and the Hollywood thing.
It's not like that.
Narcos is probably one of the most realistic, and one of the reasons that is because of the consultants that they use. Those are former DEA agents. One of them is a personal friend, a longtime supervisor of mine, Javier Pena.
Okay, let's just stop right there, because if you watch that, everybody talks about Javier.
Javi.
Was he quite the player that they made him out to be in Netflix?
He was such a great guy, just the best personality, but knew when to get down to business. And you know, back then, that was a dangerous country. Still is to some extent now, but the government cracked down so hard on the rebels and the FARC and that type of thing, the guerrillas over there. They had a hard job, and he did a great job down there.
I want to talk about that in a moment, but also when you think about the DEA, you think about CSAC, what's his name, Agent Schrader, whatever. What about Breaking Bad? Was that pretty much real, you think?
There was a lot of
license?
A lot of license there, but you know, to keep that series going as long as it did, you got to throw in some theatrics in there and some drama that wasn't necessarily real, but it was a good series.
I really enjoyed his character, but I knew the first episode when he was at a party and Walter White's house, and everyone was having some alcoholic beverages, and he takes out his pistol and hands it to folks to play with. I knew that would never happen to a DEA agent.
Exactly.
That's
It
one
better
thing.
not.
It better not. Okay.
Right.
So going back to the DEA, back when I first got into television in the early '80s. I worked for an NBC affiliate, and I can remember every night walking down the hallway there on Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, it was Pablo Escobar.
Right.
Let's talk about this war on drugs or whatever, because here's the thing. Even the mob back in the 30s and 40s and 50s would not mess with drugs because they said it's going to ruin civilization. Even the mob that ran booze, kill people, prostitutes, whatever, they said drugs are going to be a scourge. We're not getting involved in that. Now, they eventually did.
Right.
But
Because of the money.
Exactly. But there was a DEA back in the early 70s when you guys started. But then things really escalated in South Florida. And you can see that on Narcos, because I can remember watching that on the nightly news every night. There was this mystical figure by the name of Pablo Escobar. And tell me more about him, because that's where things really, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that's when things really started to escalate.
Well, he was one of the first ones to step up the violence and just the brutal murders. And he basically put his footprint down and made himself the man. And the big guys draw the smaller guys in, and it just builds and fuels the fire. And it literally grew into an empire.
when I become interested in something, I just get ravenous about it. And I got interested with the DEA, with the Narcos show on Netflix. And I was reading a whole lot of agents' backgrounds, and they were saying, back then, some of them worked in Miami. And the hardest part of their job was busting college professors selling weed to students. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden, one day, they look up and teenagers from Colombia are in South Florida shooting at them with automatic weapons. And so that was almost like, it seems like a light switch was flicked.
Right, and it builds up obviously a lot that we didn't see and didn't know about at the time, but you're right, it seems like with a flick of a switch it went to an epidemic, just a disaster.
What did Javi have to say about running after, and basically his little group there finally got Pablo Escobar? And let me also say, I think at first back in the 80s, most officers or agents, you guys were called agents, had like 6 shooters, and everybody had to get up to speed quickly with automatic weaponry.
Yeah, it's, I started my local law enforcement career here in East Texas in 1985, and we carried wheel guns. Mm-hmm. That was
revolvers.
The gun, revolvers, sure. 6 shooters, and that evolved because of the violence, and you and I have talked in the past about just our weaponry now. Everyone carries a weapon now, a rifle now,
mm-hmm.
A long gun. It's just necessary. The pistol just won't do it anymore, and that's how, I hate to say violent as a country as we become, but there's so much violence mm-hmm. in our country.
And also back then it was Nancy Reagan, just say no, the war on drugs or whatever. Have we won the war on drugs? Have we lost? Are we in the middle of it or what?
That's a great question, and this came up during one of the press conferences we did right after it, and they said, are you guys winning the war on drugs? Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is, I don't think we'll ever win the war, but every kilogram of methamphetamine or cocaine that we take off the street is keeping that out of the hands of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of kids and young people on our streets today. So no, we're not winning the overall war, but we're doing the best we can do. And if you throw supply and demand in there, the demand is here in the United States and someone's going to supply it.
That's really makes me angry, because just last week I was watching, I think it was the Smithsonian Channel or whatever, and they were talking about, it was a show about the police dealing with cartels and drugs in Montana and Wyoming. I can't believe they're that far up north. And something that one officer, because he was local, said there that really made me angry. And he said, Montana, grew up here, it's not Mayberry anymore. And it makes me furious that now, I'm all for immigration as long as it's legal. I think it's great. But this whole thing with the cartels moving in, setting up shop, becoming so dangerous, mm-hmm. it makes me angry as an American citizen.
Well, and again, greed, money, it makes life so much less valuable. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame that it has come to that, but the drug cartels are out there. Sales from the cartels, they're here.
Yeah.
And I know we'll talk hopefully about the tag
we are.
that's coming in, but that's a direct result of it, and I wish everyone was as mad and fed up with it, the violence.
Yeah. All right, let's talk specifically now about East Texas. If I did a man on the street thing right now in Tyler, Longview, Jacksonville, or whatever, and I went up to people walking outside of Walmart, Starbucks, whatever, and I'd say, what's the #1 drug right now that's a huge problem? I think most people would go, fentanyl. And then I would say, what is fentanyl? And they would say, I have no idea. Because I have no idea. I hear about fentanyl all the time. I read about the news. It's dangerous. What is it, and why is it such a problem, and where did it come from?
Well, it's a man-made synthetic opioid. And all we hear about nowadays is the opioid crisis, because it is so big and it's everywhere. It's reached out and touched every facet of all of our communities. And it is a man-made opioid, and it is made to feed the addict. That's what it is.
Where did it come from? When did it finally start? When did it start? Because again, around East Texas, you hear about meth, and we can talk about that too. That's a huge problem here. And maybe you hear about, I don't know, heroin, but all of a sudden, fentanyl. And what happened?
It started being produced to address the addicts that need something else.
About how many years ago do you think?
Oh, it started several years ago, but China stepped in, saw the money-making power behind it, and now the statistics say that a kilogram of fentanyl bought from China for $3,000 to $5,000 can produce close to 400,000 pills, fentanyl pills. And fentanyl, you got to remember this, it's not measured in grams like coke and meth are. It is measured in micrograms, and two specks is enough to kill a human being.
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding. So one of the reasons you see all the overdoses, and we're hearing about the fentanyl overdoses, is if they have one pill, and they're made in rogue laboratories. So if this pill press that the cook, for lack of a better term, is using, if they put 1.2 micrograms in one pill and 1.5 in another, and that addict takes one, he's going to get the high, but he's not going to get the oomph, especially the more he takes. If he takes that second pill, he's dead. Didn't mean to do it. It's an accident. That's why you've got all the people dead right now, all the celebrities from overdoses. Those are accidental overdoses.
So backing up, so once again with Pablo Escobar, back with cocaine in the 80s, that came from South America.
Yes.
But you're saying the fentanyl, this scourge, is coming from China. How does it get here?
A lot of it is, and the internet, we have a dark web out there. You can buy anything from prescription pills, antibiotics, steroids, hydrocodone, oxycodone. It is out there, and it's so available. And you know, I don't like to beat statistics, but one that just sticks out to me, I saw this at a conference that we did not too long ago. And if everybody thinks about this, the United States of America, we make up 5% of the world's population, 5%. The United States of America consumes 99% of all the hydrocodone produced in the world, and 85% of the oxycodone produced in the entire world.
So
it's
no
5%. That's scary.
So no wonder people want to come here and sell, because there is the market.
Supply and demand.
Why is that? Why is our country like that? Do you know? Has there been some sort of evaluation?
Things have just gotten so lax, and that's why we had to start not arresting our way out of the problem. We started having to have these drug take-backs. And you saw some of the boxes.
You have it. Let me just say right now, before we started filming today, Jeff showed us the office, the DEA office here in South Tyler, and there are boxes and boxes and boxes, which I guess we should say kudos to people on a drug give back that turned them back in. But how many 100 pounds is it back there?
So the Tyler area of responsibility, our DEA office here, we're the only DEA office between Dallas and Shreveport. So we cover 24 counties in our area of responsibility, very large area. Each year we do 2 national drug take-back initiatives. So on 2 Saturdays a year, 10 to 2, in April and October, we give people the opportunity to bring back drugs that they no longer need or want.
Scripts.
Absolutely, that have been sitting up in the medicine
No one turns
cabinet.
in any weed, right?
No, not any weed, not any weed.
Hey, you see my weed?
But this past Saturday, our area of responsibility with all the locations that brought in drugs, just our office brought in over 7,000 pounds.
7,000
Not
pounds?
hundreds, 7,000 pounds of unused and unwanted drugs. That's why we have the problem. There's that many drugs. You know, a person goes in and gets their wisdom teeth extracted, and a doctor writes them a prescription, or the dentist, for 30, 40 oxycodones or hydrocodones. Honestly, that person probably needs about a third of that prescription. So what do you do with the rest of it? Put it in the medicine cabinet, forget about it. We've got teenagers out there, we've got kids out there. It just gets into the wrong hands. So for people, the communities, to see that there is such a big need for that to turn in all those drugs, 7,000 pounds is a lot of pills.
That's a ton,
That's
man.
a lot of drugs.
That is something. So let's talk about gateway drugs, because I think you and I are almost the same age or whatever. I know back in the 70s, everyone kind of flirted around with weed or this or that or whatever. It was there. And some folks say marijuana is not a gateway drug, because there's a big fight right now in our state about legalize it, keep it illegal, this, that, or whatever. But I saw with my own eyes a lot of folks, it went far beyond experimenting to all of a sudden 20-year-olds showing up at parties wanting to sell black mollies and speed. And so I only know from my experience, I have seen where it's a gateway drug. Now, some folks right now who are watching this will scoff and say, no way, we use it to mellow out, listen to music, and fall asleep, and maybe have too much fried chicken. But I can just tell you, in my lifetime, I've seen that's where it starts. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And back then, way back then,
way back
for
in
you
the
and
70s.
The purity level, the strength of marijuana was weak. It
Really?
was very, very weak. Single-digit potency for the THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, the active chemical in marijuana. Nowadays, it's produced hydroponically. It's cross-pollinated.
What does that mean, hydroponically?
It means it's grown inside under very strict conditions where
It's grown very well. It's not
grown
in
very
somebody's
well.
backyard.
No, it's not junk weed. That's what they used to call it. This is high-grade marijuana. This is being grown in the states where it's legal, and it's being shipped right in here to Texas, which is absolutely 100% against the law. But you're right. And, you know, the argument goes back and forth about legalizing it and medicinal marijuana. You know, last week when House Bill, I believe it was 63, 65, I can't remember the exact number, it was rushing through the House down in Austin.
63.
Okay, 63. Guaranteed to pass big time.
And it did.
Failed. It failed. The lieutenant governor.
It went to the Senate.
Yes.
And he basically put the kibosh on that.
He did, because he said that's one step closer to legalizing marijuana.
And a lot of folks went, oh.
They did, but and it's not even an argument, my stance on it is this. I've been doing this for many, many, many years, and I've interviewed a lot of people, whether it be a defendant, a confidential informant, anyone involved in the drug trade, addicts, and my food for thought on this is almost, if not all, 100% of every single person I've interviewed started with marijuana. So I totally agree with the gateway drug. It's never enough. One pill is never enough. Weed is not going to be enough. You got to go on to something else to keep getting the high.
I am pretty cool with it with medicinal, because when I worked at the television station in Nashville, a guy older than me I used to work with, he came down with cancer. And the only thing that made him not want to throw up all the time or made him want to eat was marijuana. And he ended up buying it from people there at the television station just for that. But he was older and he didn't go on with it. It's just what he needed for his illness. And I thought, man, if I were sick to that extreme, I would do anything to level myself out. But that's a whole different thing.
It's a whole different thing. And there are legitimate studies, medical studies being done to see if it can help with epileptic seizures, that type of thing. And I'm not including that in our recreational user that wants to smoke some marijuana and then go drive to a restaurant and have some food. You know, they've done all these studies with youth and young adults, and about 80% of them said, if they legalize marijuana, I'm going to try it, if they haven't already. You know, and the argument is, well, it's legal. Well, so is alcohol and cigarettes. And look what happens every single day with that. We got thousands of people dying. So just because something's legal doesn't make it okay. Heroin is grown in the ground just like marijuana is, and heroin's far from harmless. So, you know, there is a comparison there.
When we talk about marijuana, let's talk about CBD. I have never in my life seen so much misinformation and people in ignorance, and I don't mean stupidity. I mean just ignorance, because I'm ignorant about a lot of things about when it comes to medicine and it comes to opioids and it comes to CBD oil. But now in East Texas, we're having this, every day you hear about some, what we used to call them head shops, busted, their stuff gets taken out, but then again you go to one store and there it is. We went down, my wife and I went down to Drug Emporium to get some CBD oil because we heard about some things that we were going through that might help or whatever. They had it off the shelf because the DEA came through and made them take it off. And so what's going on with that? Because there is some confusion about that.
It is.
There's a lot of confusion about that.
The CBD oil is one of those, it's on the cusp. and it's being studied and really looked at to see, is this stuff harmful? Is it not harmful? And you know, the local police department, we've talked with them, with the chief and the sheriff here, and it's a tough subject right now because, you know, it's just like the synthetic cannabinoids or the K2, the potpourri that was a big thing a while back.
Which as news people drove us crazy because we would go on raids or busts with law enforcement, and then I would drive down the road and it's kind of like, come here and do this, whatever, in K2, and I'm like, well, how come they're not shut down?
It is. This is very similar to the CBD oil. And the hemp is the same. It's just like that. It's right in the starting blocks, if you will. And you can have one batch of CBD oil that may have some THC oil in there. Well, now you're breaking the law. That's against the law. Marijuana is still a federal Schedule I controlled substance. No legitimate medical use at this point for it. Other CBD oil, and I know of a local place in our area that has actually sold some olive oil. Mm-hmm. Portraying it to be CBD oil. Oh. That's what it tested. We ended up having to send it from a lab to the FDA lab, and they came back and said, it's olive oil. You don't know what you're getting on the street. It's just like folks that order chemicals and pain pills and fentanyl from China. You don't know what you're getting, and China doesn't care what you're getting.
Because I know a lot of people, I hear all the time, get pharmaceuticals through the mail, through some other place or whatever, because they can't afford, because they don't have a good prescription place policy where they work. They don't have good insurance when it comes to that sort of thing. So they're getting pain pills from wherever they can.
No, but you can't trust a country that produces that much illegal drugs and know for sure that that's what you're getting. Now, on China's behalf, they have started regulating a lot of drugs that are being shipped into the United States. But again, the dark web out there, you can order just about anything you want to online.
There's just so much confusion. How can you become unconfused? What do you do? Where do you go to read? Is there a website? Is there anything? Or I mean, we're right in this sort of like nebulous gray area right now.
Yeah, and
or am I wrong?
No, you're right. And our intelligence people are really trying to keep up with this. And I hate to throw somebody to a website, but our website really does have a lot of good information, a lot of updated information. DEA.gov.
Okay.
That's the best place to go, DEA.gov. And we have resources on there, parent talks for kids, for teenagers, dangers, talking points about marijuana, methamphetamine, how dangerous it is. And I know we'll touch on the meth, but methamphetamine is it's big.
Well, let's touch on it now, because the deal is, when I first moved here, and again, I was a babe in the woods when it came to meth. I did like a 5-part series on it and still didn't know enough about it. But right now, is that still East Texas' #1 drug of choice?
Absolutely.
And why is it? It's easy?
Back years ago, even before I got on with the DEA, we would run into meth labs where people were cooking it in their homes or out in a shed or out in the woods.
Like Walter White.
Like Walter White. And
Winnebago.
It was junky, nasty
Kill
stuff,
you.
very impure. And nowadays, once again, I hate to keep saying it, but supply and demand, there is such a demand for it here in the United States that Mexico is producing it in super labs. And it is so cheap and so pure, so clean, that you don't need to make it anymore. No one needs to cook meth anymore because
you can buy
it's here. It's everywhere, and it is pouring across the border. Absolutely pouring across the border.
Along with immigration, illegal immigration, or how?
Yes. I mean,
it is. It's part of that?
It's mixed in. It really is. And, you know, one of the things I always use as an example, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little longer, the purity of methamphetamine that we would seize on the street would be right around 50%, maybe 60 on a really good batch. Today, and I don't remember in the last year and a half or so seeing less than 97 to 99% pure methamphetamine.
Oh my gosh.
That should scare people, because it is that dangerous, and it's just everywhere, and it's cheap.
And what about heroin? Is our old buddy H still around?
We do see the heroin. It kind of goes hand in hand with the opioids, and a good example to use is this. A person gets hooked on the, just say hydrocodone or oxy, and they go out and they doctor shop and they try to find a a different doctor each time that'll write them a prescription. At some point, they're going to run out of doctors. They're going to run out of opportunity to get their hands on the pills. Heroin is dirt cheap, and it's basically the same effect.
I thought heroin would be expensive.
It's not. It's not expensive.
Maybe I'm thinking
It's-
70s, 80s, whatever.
It was back then. Now it's the go-to for the opioid addict that runs out of pharmacies that will fill their prescriptions.
What is the definition of an opioid?
It's a synthetic painkiller. That's the simplest way to put it right there.
It's
But
a
it's
synthetic
so
drug.
strong. Fentanyl, and if I get the numbers right, fentanyl is 50 times stronger than morphine and a certain strength more than heroin. Carfentanil, which we don't hear a lot about,
So what is that?
it's actually an elephant tranquilizer that we have started seeing.
Carfentanil?
Carfentanil, not fentanyl, but carfentanil is actually a legitimate elephant tranquilizer that's being produced now. Again, always got to have a step up. Marijuana's not always going to be enough. You got to have something a little stronger. That's our problem.
So you see everything all the time, drug raids, dealing with people, dealing with suspects, dealing with broken families or whatever. What is like the number one problem now with drugs, and who's the most vulnerable?
To me, now in addition to the methamphetamine, pills, pain pills, addicted pills. Used to, a drug addict was stereotyped, as somebody that did nothing but lay around and stay high all day. We've got people out here that have legitimate addictions and need treatment. They're hooked on pain medicine and they're out driving around in their cars. It's breaking up families. It's tearing homes apart. And it's such a crisis because there's so much out there, and it affects so many more people and families now than it did back in the 70s and 80s. It was more of an isolated problem then. Now, it is literally a crisis, and it's terrible. That's what I see a lot of whenever I speak to people. That's what they say. Well, I've got a family member who has a pain pill.
A lot
addiction.
of people do.
It's a lot. It's not like it used to be with the other drugs.
Do you do public speaking like for Lions clubs or this or that or whatever? Because if you don't, you should.
No,
because there's a lot of ignorance going on. And like I said, I'm one of them. I don't know a whole lot about this or whatever. And a lot of people don't know signs or this or that, whatever, if somebody was on pain
We
pills.
do, and you and I have talked about this. It's something that DEA, we as an agency have needed to do for a long time, to start getting our name out there and getting out into the public and trying to tell people things. I'm not an expert, but I've been around a lot and I've seen a lot. So I enjoy going out speaking to the different clubs. And we just spoke, one of our diversion investigators here, and I just spoke at a East Texas Health Conference last week. And we talked about a lot of this same thing. And it's just amazing how many people come up after the speech and say, I relate to that because whatever it may be. But some of those statistics, like the one I told you about with the 5% of the world's population, man, that's massive. That's huge.
It is. Who is the modern day drug dealer? It's not the guy with the hippie walk in the 70s hanging on the head.
It can be the kid at high school that's selling his dad's pain pills. Literally, there's your everyday, current day, present day drug dealer. Is that right there? A kid that gets his hands on pain pills. Hydrocodone pill or an oxy pill can sell for up to $30 a tablet. $30 a tablet. That's as lucrative as cocaine and meth is. And it's a shame because it's a legal drug and it has a legitimate purpose. Pain pills do. Every one, whatever the case may be, they have.
I just had some dental surgery a while back. Trust me, I love the pain medicine.
Goodness for
I
the
had
pain
to have it or I would have been dead.
But people have to be able to say enough is enough. I don't need any more. Let's get on to the Advil and the Tylenol.
Do you still deal with gangs? And because this kind of leads us into the tag situation that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, the conference that I spoke at last week, it was funny. I asked,
where was it, by the way?
Out at TJC West campus. We had, it's a compilation of school nurses, school counselors, and educators that come in once a year.
Let me ask you this. When you go speak or whatever, I would hope that you would put that on your website so people could find that.
Well,
or at least maybe let us, the media know.
Yeah, man, I'd
so
love
we
to
could
take
go
you
cover
everywhere. Yeah, it would be great. That would be really good. It gets the word out even more. And they have the conference in conjunction with the drug take back. So they have the conference on a Friday, and it's the Friday before the Saturday of the drug take back. So we can really put the word out there. But to get back to your question, I asked during the presentation, I said, how many folks in here have heard who knows what a tag is? And literally 2 people out of the 70 or 80 people in attendance had ever heard of the tag. And
What is the tag?
So the tag is the Texas Anti-Gang Task Force. That is being stood up right here in Tyler, Texas.
Really?
The governor of Texas saw the need. There are only a few statewide. There's one out in Lubbock that we're trying to kind of take off and mirror here. And it's going to be a task force made up of local, state, and federal agencies all working together.
Well, good.
You know, a lot of times the locals do their thing, the state. We try to work as much as we can together.
Much as you
but
can.
This task force is going to go after the actual gang members. Go after them and put them in the penitentiary, put them in prison.
Well, we're told sometimes by some local entities, like the gang problem's not a big deal. But then again, we see the fallout from that because we covered that. We're like, come on, man. I mean, come on.
Well,
and I saw you kind of reflect there or whatever. So,
I think
am I right or wrong?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to call anybody out, but it's obvious it's a problem.
It is, and it's become more and more apparent.
How bad of a problem is it here?
Well, if you go an hour and 45 minutes up the road to Dallas, it's a lot worse there. But for Tyler itself, the police department here, the sheriff's office does a fantastic job, and we all work great together, and the other federal agencies too. But the problem is we can't gate off Tyler and keep the bad guys out. You know, they're going to come here, and we've got to address the problem. That's what this tag is going to do. It's just going to make a team that's going to be able to really, really take a bite out of this, and I think it's going to be a great thing. And for the governor's office to realize that this area, and the reason it's in Tyler is not because Tyler's is bad. It's the whole area. It's the whole entire East Texas area. So we're talking a wide range that this tag is going to cover. So I think it's a great idea. I'm going to assign people to it full time, and we're going to go out and work hand in hand.
When's the next drug take back?
October. They do it around the
Where's it
third
going to
week.
be?
Tyler does it in different locations. Tyler has a location, Longview, Henderson, Marshall, all of our different cities are participating now, which is great. The one they did Saturday was at Robert E. Lee. They had a group of high school students out there with a couple of Tyler PD officers. One of our diversion investigators was there with them, just kind of welcoming everyone. So October, to answer your question.
Is there anything else out there that we should know about that? Are you going to let us know so we can kind of?
I'd love for us to have a continuing, thing. If something comes up, I would love to reach out to you. And
before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit more about cartels. This frightens me because they're out there.
They are out there. And look at it this way, in a practical sense. Mexican drug cartel, whatever, produces 50 pounds of meth. They're not just going to send that over to San Antonio, and from San Antonio on to Dallas, and then Dallas further north, and not have cells and contacts and people in those places. They're not going to send it to Joe Blow. They're going to send their cartel, their trusted people, to be on the receiving end of it once it gets across the border.
Because we've seen it here. I mean, people who are assigned by the cartel to live on a patch of land, they irrigate the crop, the weed, the whatever, and if they mess up the job, they get killed.
We've had cooperating people say that they've threatened my family in Mexico. They brought me up here to live in these grow sites. That was my job, to keep my family alive. And I don't know if you remember it, 3 years ago, we did massive marijuana grows right here in our East Texas region. And if we ever get some time to look at the pictures, it's just amazing. They literally take up shop, move in, they eat, drink, sleep, live in these fields, fertilizing the patches, blocking up the streams to fill them up, our water.
And what do you do if they're on your land?
Most people, it's very rural where the grows are done, and
so they sneak on someone's land.
And most of the people never even go to that particular portion. We've seen, if you grid it out, it's like a block. It's just a small outlying portion of the property
that you mow past, but you never go back there.
Never even look. Yeah, very remote.
How do we get rid of the cartels? How do we push back and get rid of all this? Can we do it?
Well, we've got to keep,
in our lifetime?
we've got to keep doing what we're doing. You asked earlier, we went in the drug war. No, but we're hitting them, and we're going to keep on hitting them, and that's the best we can do.
Well, El Chapo was he's going to be thrown in prison. I can't believe it, but they found him guilty.
Yeah.
Once he got to America, how do I want to say this? Crooked Mexican judge could let him go. And so he found U.S. justice. He got extradited here, so he's in the hole. But someone in law enforcement said it's going to be next man or woman up.
It's just like on a local level. As soon as they snatch one, we get one or two. Someone is just waiting to take their place. Absolutely.
So before I let you go, is there anything else we've talked about that you want to talk about that I haven't hit on?
No, I just really appreciate the time that we've had to sit down and just throw some of the local topics around and talk about what's going on in the East Texas area. This is, I've said it before, all the managers and supervisors like me in the local, state, federal system, we live here. Our kids go to school here. I have a passion for this because this is my
you're
home.
from here.
I'm from here.
And that's what federal agencies, I think, okay, here's a little editorial here. This is what they should do. I know you guys come out of the academy, you got to go to Detroit, San Francisco, or whatever, but most people want to go back home. But you have more money in the game because you're back home.
Right.
And I wish other national agencies, alphabet soup like the other ones, would do the same thing because they have an interest here, as opposed to, well, I'm going to be there for 4 or 5 years, I can't wait to get out.
And I think the productivity is higher, it's better, the people are happier, their families are happier. It again, for me, I'm blessed, I'm at home, this is where I grew up, so I love it here and I take an interest.
If there are questions for you, if the DEA or whatever, how can we get in touch with you?
Well, directly, you can call our office right here in Tyler. A lot of people, you'd be amazed at how many people don't even know we have federal agencies. We got Secret Service and ATF and FBI and Marshal Service. We've got a huge representation of federal agencies here, but we're right here in Tyler. Look up on the web. I won't give out my cell number,
Don't
but
do that.
hey, you can find us, and we'll take questions. If you've got information and want to come in, whatever, we're here. I hate to say we're with the government and we're here to help.
Sometimes that doesn't
here in
work.
Tyler, I promise you, we're here to do whatever we can do to help the community.
Well, this has been podcasting before. You've made it a great success. I really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Let me also thank everybody else. Mike Lowe, Will Bethencourt, Kemp Walker, Dylan Schofield, all part of the big podcast. We can't get it done without their help because they're the highly trained technicians that make it work. This has been today's Neil Barton's Got a Podcast. Remember, everyone has the right to my opinion, and we'll see you next time.
Ja, hejsan sådana till everything. Who's you gonna get? What's you gonna get? Son, wonderful. Been a man of crap. What's every other? That's something every other.